Hi, and welcome to Buster Rhino's Learning Series. Today we're doing a special on pork shoulder. We're going to show you what the different parts of a pork shoulder are, what the different styles are, and then how to put your rub on it. There's many ways to cook a pork shoulder. You can do it in a slow cooker, or you can do it in a smoker, or a southern style barbecue. All of them will do the same thing, and you cook it low and slow for a long period of time to help break down the muscles and the tendons. When we're done, after about 18 hours, our pork will reach 188 to 194 degrees, and we'll pull it off the smoker, and then we'll show you how to pull the pork and what the different muscle structures are when you're pulling it apart. Pulled pork is the easiest thing to cook on a barbecue. It's very hard to make a mistake. The only two mistakes you can really do are cooking it over temperature and cooking it under temperature. And cooking it over temperature is incredibly hard to do. Without further ado, pork shoulder. So this is a pork shoulder. We commonly have three different styles of pork shoulder in North America. There is the Boston butt, which is this part of the shoulder. It comes from the spine down to the knuckle on where the leg joins. It comes from the neck and just up from the ribs. This side would be called the picnic roast. It's not as fatty, it doesn't have as much sinew in it to hold it together, and that's kind of why they leave the skin on. And this whole encompassing piece would be a New York shoulder. It's a New York cut. I'm not 100% sure where the nomenclature comes from, but that's what they're called. So at our meat packing plant, which is Buster Rhino's, we buy our pork shoulders in the New York style. We find we get a much better product out of it. This is the skin that's left on here, and the skin we leave on for the cooking. This will shrink considerably. We don't have to put rub on it. We don't have to put anything on it. You can cut it off beforehand, but the problem with cutting it off beforehand is a lot of this fat here will come off of it, and you'll lose some meat. Most Boston butts will have a layer of fat on this side. They're usually a quarter-inch cut, and there's a layer of fat, and people will cut it off. Now, there's plenty of ways to do pork shoulder, and one of the ways is through a slow cooker. You'd probably use a picnic roast for that. In a smoker, such as a Weber Smoky Down or something, most people would do something with the Boston butt, which is just a fantastic shoulder, and you just get more meat off the New York. Now, we put a mustard base on it. It doesn't really do a lot in the way of flavor or anything, but it can be normal. And that works really well with the pork shoulder. Considering the pork shoulder is such a big piece of meat, you really have a hard time over-spicing it. And putting the spice on creates that really nice bark that everybody looks for in their pulled pork. You could use anything for this. You could not use it. The rub will absolutely stick on without it. It doesn't go anywhere. We've used bourbon, which is fantastic. We've used applesauce. We've used apple juice. We've used a lot of different things to coat these. So what we do is here, we coat very, very heavily in a layer of mustard. It doesn't have to be thick. It just has to be on all the meat edges. So you want to get down here. This is kind of where the first knuckle on the leg is. Get the sides, and you're going to flip it over. This is the part that is actually inside the meat. It really, you can see the big structures of meat here. You're going to find this against the ribs. You can see a lot of the rib-looking stuff there. And then when we pull this off in 18 hours, and we start actually working on this, I'll be able to show you these big cuts of meat and how they come off, and all this connective tissue is making it very hard. Right now, you couldn't pull it apart. It's all broken down and it just falls. Now, I could just do this and show you that, but we don't. We actually coat heavy. We coat very heavy. We don't have a problem with that. This is salt pepper mixture. This is our Carolina seasoning salt. It's always been used for pork shoulder. We also use it on our brisket. We use it on chicken. At home, we use it on corn on the cob. There's really nothing better than this on corn on the cob to make it taste flavorful. And a little bit on the end there. And that's it. And then when we're done that, we'll take it. This is our big commercial smoker back here in the background. You see, it's a Southern Fried SPK 500, and we'll fit about 30 to 36 of these on every night. Most weeks we do it 5 days a week. This week we're co-packing some for our farmers. So this is actually going to a company called the Whole Hog, a whole pig, and which is out in north of London, and they do a lot of our pork for us. They're a really great farming family. They also do a lot of garlic. They're big garlic farmers in Ontario as well. And that's it. So now this will go in the smoker. It'll go in the smoker. We do it at between 225 and 240, and that depending on how fast we want to cook it. But that'll take anywhere from 16 to 18 hours. And there's a lot of argument over when pork shoulder is done and how long it takes. Pork shoulder is done when it's done. At 225, we can get, depending on the pork shoulder, between 16 and 18 hours, and a lot of other environmental factors. But really what you're looking for is a temperature between 188 and 194. That's when we found that the pork comes off. It pulls easier. We still get a fairly firm texture to the pork instead of something that's loose and falling apart and dry. And that is different on every smoker. If you were to come to my house and we were to cook this on my backwoods, my big backwoods commercial one, which we have for fun, we'd pull it off at 196. That's when we found it's really done very well. But there's other smokers that have done 184. It's completely done. It has a lot of factors involved. So you really have to look at what you're doing. So don't necessarily ask how long a pork shoulder takes. A pork shoulder is done when it hits the proper temperature. Don't be impatient. Don't pull it off. You're going to have a plateau at a certain point. It's going to be about 166, 165, and it could sit there for 4 or 5 hours before that plateau breaks and it starts going back up in temperature. So anyways, we're going to put this on along with another 36 of them, and we will see you in 18 hours. Good morning. It's 18 hours later, and the pork shoulder has come fresh off the smoker from a nice long cook. We cook at this shoulder, we cooked at 225 to 227 all night. We used oak and maple to give it the wood flavor that we need and the smoking that we need. And now it's time to pull it. It's cooled down for a few minutes so I can actually touch it. Usually it comes off, as I said yesterday, from 188 to 196-ish. And because we put so many shoulders on at once, some of them are at 188, and some of them are at 196, depending on where they are in the smoker, on the shelf, and stuff like that. So this side here was the, if you remember from yesterday, is the Boston butt. And this side here is the picnic roast, and this whole thing is the New York. If you remember, the New York has a big layer of skin on it. I said don't cut it off because it comes off easier when it's cooked. It really does. It just pulls off. So it's a bit much easier to pull it off like that, and then you can just pull out some of the meat if it's stuck there, and there's no actual real work involved in that. We like to get all the meat. We aren't too finicky about it, but even this piece here that looks like it's really hard will add a lot of flavor to your pork as it sits through the day or at home. In here, there's several bones that you have to worry about, and several pieces of cartilage. On the picnic side, there is a big leg bone. Okay, that's got to come out. And in here, there is, in a lot of cases, pieces of bone. But there's also right here, and you can always see this when you buy the pork shoulder, is the shoulder blade. That's an easy piece to pull out. Take that, throw your fat away. There's two pieces to this. You can see it looks like a lot of people call it butterfly. That comes off. The meat should fall off there really easy. If it doesn't come off, the where it's probably going to stick is on the bottom side here. There's a very large chunk of meat that is the longest to cook. A lot of cases when we take our temperature right in there, or right where the intersection of the bone is in the New York. And that can be thrown out. And in here, there's this small piece of cartilage that is almost always there, and we like to call it the toenail, because it sometimes looks like a toenail, and that should come out too. Okay, there may be you always have to look out for other pieces of bone. There was some others in here that usually are in our shoulders that aren't in this one. And then basically what you're doing is you're getting rid of the fat. Now, every shoulder is the same, and if you do enough, then you start realizing there's things you want to take off, like chunky pieces of fat here, which are really good. And if you like eating fat, which I do, I don't have a problem with leaving those in. Some customers don't like it though. But you don't have to really pull it apart. We leave it like this, and then later on when we actually go to serve it, we'll put a couple tongs in it and just do that and break it up. A lot of people call pulled pork when they do this. it doesn't really matter. Or they could pull it apart, or they could, a lot of people will do, what they'll do is they'll take this, and they'll take a large butcher knife, and just chop it, and that's called chopped pork. Pulled pork is when you pull it apart. It all comes down to personal preference. I don't mind big chunks of pork in my pulled pork. I actually kind of like it. It gives me some mouthfeel to it. So you're basically pulling big chunks of meat out of here, and that's all you're doing. Taking out any ugly marks. There's always going to be ugly stuff that you don't want. This piece of meat is always like the shoulder blade is here. There's always this big, large piece of meat there. It's a nice piece. It can be cut, ripped in half, kind of pulled apart. In here, you see it's a huge amount. And this is why we use the New Yorks. Look at all that gorgeous beef, and there's pork, very, very little fat in there at all to worry about. You can just take huge chunks of this off and not worry about it. See that? And really, the long smoking process, what it's done is it's broken down all that connective tissue that would normally keep all of this well together, and like it should. And all you're trying to do is get rid of that whatever is left over there that you don't want to eat. Once again, these pieces here, although they look really tough, which I'll say that for myself, look really tough, they're not. They're really, really very good. They add a lot of flavor to sandwiches. It's the bark, which everybody is really want. Now, underneath that shoulder blade, this sits like this. It's this piece of meat here. It's a big piece of meat, and it really doesn't need a lot to be done with it. A little bit of silver skin that's broken down fairly well on the outside of it, and that was what usually would hold this onto this. And that's one just big piece of meat. You don't have to do anything with it. Take your fatty pieces out that you don't want to keep. On this side here, so this is here as a reference. This side here is the side for me, which is my favorite. If I'm going to save a piece, if it's the morning, and I'm going to save a piece of pork for breakfast, this is where I'm going to get it from. You get the best piece of skin from here. It almost turned into like a pork jerky. It really tastes great. That's what I'm going to ask for on a sandwich. In here, though, you have meat that is very akin to rib meat. It's actually, when you look at it, this is the piece that looks like ribs, and this piece of meat here is really like that there. These are the pieces that if you're doing a long slow cook and you're the one that's cooking this and serving it to friends, you're going to want to steal that piece before you even bring it to the table. Any of these pieces here, they're just absolutely gorgeous. And that's it. As you can see, that only took me about 2.5 minutes to pull that, and I wasn't going very fast. So it's very easy, it's quick to do, and it makes a beautiful product. And you can do this on any smoker, you can do it on any barbecue, and you end up with about, when you do a pork shoulder, you'll end up with about 45 to 50% if you pull it this way. That's your keep, that's your throwaway. And at 50% pork, you're looking at a couple pounds in here at least. And that all makes their beautiful sandwiches. And you can do whatever you want with it. All right, that's how you do a pork shoulder. As I said, there's many different ways to do great southern barbecue and great great pulled pork. It's a really hard meat to make a mistake on. So if you're going to get into barbecue, this is certainly one of those cuts of meat that you should attempt to do early on. See you next time for the Buster Rhino's Barbecue Learning Series.